A 7-year-old black boy goes to a playground, just wanting a turn on the swing. Instead, 3 white mothers tell him he doesn't belong there, because of the color of his skin. What they didn't know. His father is a U.S. Congressman. And what came next would shake their perfect little community to its core. This is not just a story about racism. It's a story about justice, dignity, and a father's powerful response to protect his child's right to simply play. It was one of those golden afternoons in late spring when the breeze teased the leaves just enough to make them whisper secrets to the grass. The sunlight danced through the branches of tall sycamore trees that towered like watchful sentinels over Larchmont Green, a neighborhood park where everything looked perfectly curated, as if every blade of grass had been arranged by design. The park was neatly sectioned, a jungle gym bright with red and yellow bars, a sandbox ringed with low benches, a merry-go-round, and 2 sturdy swings hanging from metal chains that shimmered in the sun. Children ran in circles, their shrieks of joy carried on the wind. Parents lounged nearby, some scrolling through phones, others chatting in small clusters, lulled by the hum of suburban ease. In the midst of this serene portrait came a boy, 7 years old, wearing a slightly oversized NASA t-shirt and jeans with frayed cuffs. His name was Elijah Bennett. His shoes were dusty but well-loved, and his eyes scanned the playground with the tentative hope of a child new to a place but eager to belong. He carried a small backpack with a juice box and a worn copy of The Little Prince, his favorite book. His father had dropped him off at the curb just 10 minutes earlier, smiling and kissing the top of his head before reminding him to stay safe and to make a friend if you can. Elijah had found a quiet spot on a bench and waited. He watched other children claim the jungle gym, shriek in delight down the slide, chase each other through the grass. When the swing finally opened, he stood and walked toward it, heart fluttering in anticipation. But just as he gripped the cool metal chains and prepared to sit, he heard the sound of footsteps. Paige Whitmore had noticed him. She always noticed things that didn't quite fit her version of normal. Her platinum hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and her yoga pants were as pristine as her judgment. She was accompanied by her usual circle, Brooke Langley and Vanessa Carlton, 2 women whose conversations often began and ended with complaints about housekeepers, Pilates classes, and the horrors of gluten. Paige watched Elijah with pursed lips, sunglasses resting high on her head like a crown. Her daughter Madison was nearby, pouting because she wanted to swing too. "That swing's taken, sweetie," Paige called gently to Madison, then louder, to make sure Elijah heard. "Excuse me, young man." Elijah turned, confused, polite. Paige stepped closer, her voice coated in artificial sweetness but carried by something sharper. "This is a private neighborhood park. Do your parents live around here?" "I'm just playing," Elijah replied, confused. "My dad dropped me off." Brooke rolled her eyes. "This isn't just for anyone to walk in. We pay HOA fees for this park." "He's not hurting anything," muttered an older man on a nearby bench. But they didn't hear him, or didn't want to. Vanessa's voice cut in like ice. "Our kids aren't used to this. He should really go somewhere else." Elijah stood frozen. The swing swayed gently behind him. He looked around, expecting someone to say something, to stop this. But the parents nearby avoided eye contact. A woman adjusted her stroller's canopy. Another looked at her phone. "I'll go," Elijah said softly, voice barely above a whisper. Paige nodded curtly, satisfied. "That would be best." His throat tight, Elijah picked up his backpack. He didn't cry. But something heavier than tears welled inside him as he walked past the playground, past the slide and jungle gym and the benches, as if they had all turned their backs too. The mothers stood in their perfect triangle of cruelty, sipping from tall water bottles and sharing quiet nods. They didn't know who Elijah was. They didn't know his name. And they didn't know that he was the son of Congressman David Bennett. Congressman David Bennett sat in his Capitol Hill office, a view of Washington's skyline stretching behind him. The wood-paneled room, filled with books, framed awards, and family photos, held the stories of his career, and of the fight he brought to every chamber he entered. The door was closed, the noise of staffers muffled beyond thick walls. He was alone, reviewing proposed amendments to a community schools bill. Then the phone rang. It was Camille. "Elijah's home," she said. Her voice was steady, but he knew the current beneath it. Something happened at the park. David leaned forward, a quiet tension rising. "Is he okay?" "He is now. But he's upset. He said some women told him their kids wouldn't play with a boy like him." David closed his eyes. There was a long silence between them. "They told him to leave," Camille continued. "They said the park wasn't for kids like him." He stood, his chair creaking softly behind him. His hand gripped the edge of the desk. "Who?" He didn't get their names. But he said there were 3 moms. White. And the park was Larchmont Green. David breathed slowly, deliberately. He knew Larchmont Green. It was a manicured neighborhood, filled with people who liked to call themselves progressive at fundraisers but whispered differently when doors were closed. He had shaken hands with some of them at ribbon cuttings and school openings. He hung up, gently. Then sat again, but the calm was gone. He opened his laptop. Began searching. Paige Whitmore appeared first. PTA Vice President. Married to real estate attorney Christopher Whitmore. Frequent posts on the Neighborhood Association page, mostly about noise complaints and unusual activity. Then Brooke Langley. Small business owner. Her Instagram feed was a perfect grid of avocado toast, kids in matching outfits, and thinly veiled superiority. Vanessa Carlton. No job listed. Several posts on local forums about keeping the community clean. David read every word. Every photo. Every smile that now seemed like a mask. Then he called Jordan, his senior aide. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. I need a press contact. Something local." "Yes, sir. Can I ask what this is for?" David paused. "A reminder." "Of what?" "That playgrounds are not battlegrounds. But if they insist on making them one, I'll show them how I fight. Because this wasn't just about Elijah. It never was. It was about every boy made to feel like an outsider in his own city. And Congressman Bennett had just found his next mission. The next morning, the headlines in small digital publications across the D.C. suburbs carried a striking story: Congressman's son racially targeted at local playground. The article was brief, but the language precise. It named no names. But it didn't have to. The park was listed. The implication was clear. Something had happened in Larchmont Green, and someone with power was paying attention. Paige Whitmore scrolled the article from the kitchen table, coffee in hand, a frown pinching her brow. Her husband, Christopher, stood in the doorway tying his tie. "What's wrong?" he asked. She turned the screen toward him. "It's about that boy from yesterday. The one we told to leave the swing." Christopher took a breath. "Read." His expression shifted quickly. "You didn't tell me he was black." "Why should that matter?" Paige snapped. He stared at her. "Because his father's a congressman. David Bennett. You know who that is?" Across town, David sat in a studio at a local news station. The segment was live. "My son is 7 years old," he told the camera. "He wanted to swing. That's it." Instead, he was told he wasn't welcome because of the color of his skin. No one stopped it. No one said, "This is wrong." We must ask ourselves why that is. Viewers watched. Some nodded in solidarity. Others scrolled through their own social feeds, looking for the moms involved. Names started to surface. Screenshots of comments. A post from Paige's account 4 months earlier calling for neighborhood safety checks gained new context. At a boutique gym, Brooke Langley's phone pinged over and over. She stepped off the treadmill, chest heaving not from exertion but panic. Her assistant texted, her sister called. Her small business account, selling children's clothing, was hemorrhaging followers. At home, Vanessa Carlton sipped her tea and noticed her daughter refusing to look at her. "What's wrong, Addie?" Her daughter mumbled, "You were mean to that boy. I liked him." For the first time, Vanessa felt a sting that came not from online judgment, but from her own child's quiet disappointment. And Congressman Bennett? He wasn't finished. He met with local officials that afternoon. Pushed for legislation requiring DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, training in all HOA-managed parks. He called for an educational partnership with schools to address implicit bias in community spaces. A symbolic move, yes, but one with roots. One that made it clear he was watching. Because this wasn't just about a swing. It was about dignity. And Congressman Bennett would not let it go unanswered. The pressure was mounting, and the women of Larchmont Green could feel it in their bones. What had begun as a smug exercise of neighborhood dominance had grown into something they no longer controlled. The air in their living rooms and kitchens was different now, heavier, uncertain. The casual, insulated comfort of their suburban routines had fractured under the weight of public scrutiny. And beneath it all, Congressman David Bennett moved with the slow, exacting precision of a man who knew the long game. Paige Whitmore spent most of her day deleting comments from her social media profiles. Overnight, her PTA presidency had become a source of mockery. Someone had created a parody account using her photo with the caption, "Let's keep the playground pure." It had gone viral within hours. Sponsors for the annual school fundraiser were quietly pulling out. Madison, her daughter, had come home in tears after a classmate asked if her mother hated brown kids. At a tense emergency meeting of the Larchmont Homeowners Association, the board tried to get ahead of the unraveling. Seated in their usual folding chairs at the community clubhouse, Paige, Brooke, and Vanessa arrived late, faces taut with pride disguised as composure. The room was packed, unusually so. Normally, HOA meetings drew a handful of retirees and bored dads. Tonight, over 50 residents filled the space, some holding printed screenshots of news articles, others shaking their heads. One resident, a father named Joel Richardson, stood up. "We need to talk about what happened at the park. And not in a vague, let's all do better way. People are saying this neighborhood is racist. That reflects on all of us." Brooke shifted in her chair. "This is being blown out of proportion," she muttered. Joel raised a brow. "My wife's cousin is a school principal. She called me and asked if we live here. You know what it's like to be asked if your home is safe for black children." There was a heavy pause. "I just want the truth," he added. "Who told that boy he couldn't play?" Eyes darted toward the three women. Paige opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She wasn't used to being the villain. Her carefully cultivated image of benevolent suburbia had cracked, and now she was staring at what lay beneath it. David Bennett, meanwhile, wasn't waiting for apologies. He had doubled down. His press team had crafted a thoughtful op-ed for the Washington Post titled, "Playgrounds and Power, Why the Smallest Acts of Racism Still Matter." The article pulled no punches. It described Elijah's innocence, the public silence, and the damage done when prejudice wears yoga pants and a smile. The response was explosive. Cable news picked it up. One network invited David to speak on a Sunday panel. Activists began planning a community picnic in the same park Elijah had been driven from. Influential voices in education and public policy began reaching out to him, offering their support. But not everyone was on board. David's office began receiving anonymous emails. One said, "Your son's lying." No one said anything racist. Another warned, "Keep your politics out of our neighborhood." The phone calls came too. Some hang-ups. One man left a voicemail saying, maybe if you taught your kid to stay in his own place, we wouldn't be here. David listened to every message. He didn't flinch. At home, Elijah sat curled on the couch with Camille, watching a nature documentary. He didn't know the full extent of what was happening, only that people were suddenly talking about him, and that Daddy was on TV more than usual. "Am I in trouble?" Elijah asked quietly. Camille brushed a hand over his curls. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. But why are people mad at me?" She hesitated. How do you explain bigotry to a boy who still believes the world is mostly good? Sometimes people get mad when someone tells the truth. Especially when the truth makes them look at themselves. But we're not mad. And we're proud of you. Elijah nodded, but the weight of being noticed, really noticed, was beginning to dawn on him. He turned back to the screen, silent. Meanwhile, Vanessa Carlton had begun considering the unthinkable, pulling her daughter out of school and enrolling her somewhere else. "The judgment is unbearable," she told her husband Mark, who worked in commercial real estate. "They're treating us like criminals." Mark didn't answer right away. Then, without looking up from his laptop, he said, "Maybe it's time we ask why." At the next school board meeting, David Bennett made a surprise appearance. He didn't announce it ahead of time. He didn't bring a camera crew. He simply walked in, holding a photo of Elijah at the park, swinging alone. And when the floor opened for public comment, he stood before the microphone and said, "My name is David Bennett. I'm the father of a 7-year-old boy who was humiliated in front of his peers. I'm also a sitting congressman. But today, I speak not as a politician, but as a parent." The room was silent. I want every person in this community to ask themselves, if it was your child, what would you do? He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't name names. But he didn't have to. The walls were already closing in. And the reckoning was far from over. Larchmont Green looked the same on the surface. The grass was still mowed into crisp rows. The playground equipment glistened under the sun. And children, as always, ran beneath the watchful eyes of their parents. But something invisible hung in the air now, like the smell of rain after a storm, a promise that things had shifted. Maybe not all the way. But undeniably. The community picnic had been Camille's idea. A day for families to come together, especially those who had stayed silent. A way to reclaim the space, to bring joy back to the playground where Elijah had once been turned away. With help from David's staff and local volunteers, the plan had come together in less than a week. No banners. No speeches. Just music, food, and people. Elijah stood at the edge of the grass, holding his mother's hand. He wore a clean blue t-shirt and new sneakers. In his other hand, he held a small brown paper bag filled with chocolate chip cookies. The nervousness in his eyes faded the moment he saw 2 boys from his school run toward the jungle gym and wave him over. Camille squeezed his hand gently. "Go on," she said. He looked up at her, then ran. David arrived a few minutes later, sleeves rolled up, a tray of bottled water under one arm. His eyes scanned the park, not for danger, but for understanding. To witness change with his own eyes. Families had shown up in numbers. Black, white, Latino, Asian. Some had come to apologize. Others to simply show they were not aligned with the silence that had once reigned here. At one picnic table, Vanessa Carlton sat awkwardly beside a black mother named Sheila, who had brought 2 daughters and a bucket of homemade lemonade. Vanessa fidgeted with her phone before finally putting it down. "My daughter asked me why I was mean to Elijah," she said quietly. Sheila stirred her cup. "And what did you say?" "I didn't know what to say. But I think I'm starting to understand." Not far from them, Brooke Langley kept her distance. Her business had suffered. Her inbox had exploded with angry messages. But the worst had been the question her husband had asked one night at dinner: "What are we raising our kids to be?" She hadn't had an answer. Paige Whitmore didn't show up. Her husband had tried to convince her, but she refused. Instead, she sat in her living room, blinds closed, watching the coverage on her phone. There, on the screen, was Elijah, laughing. Running. Swinging. That same swing she had once claimed didn't belong to him. No one had forced her into exile. But shame could build a cage taller than any gate. At the center of the park, the music played softly, classic soul and upbeat pop drifting on the breeze. Kids shared juice boxes. Parents exchanged stories. And no one noticed who had more money, or lighter skin, or a louder voice. For one perfect moment, they were simply a community. Elijah found himself back at the swing. The same one. He paused, hands on the chains, heart pounding. Then a voice beside him. Want a push? It was Joel Richardson. His own daughter stood nearby, grinning. Elijah nodded. Joel smiled and stepped behind him. With a gentle push, the boy began to rise. Higher. Then higher still. His laughter rang out, clear and loud. And for everyone listening, it cut through the guilt, the silence, the history. It was not the sound of victory or vengeance. It was the sound of something far more powerful, belonging. David stood with Camille at the edge of the playground, his arm around her waist. He didn't need a podium. He didn't need applause. His son was flying. And in the stillness of that swing, the congressman found what he had fought so hard to protect. Not just a child. But a future. A swing. A sunny afternoon. And a boy who just wanted to play. What Elijah faced wasn't new, but it was wrong. And his father didn't fight back with fists. He fought with truth, with love, and with the power of being seen. That swing became more than metal and chains, it became a symbol of every child's right to belong. Because no child should ever be made to feel like they are less than, not at school, not in a park, not anywhere. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where someone stood up to injustice in an everyday place? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters.